transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the metal platform. Commander Vex watched from the observation deck as steam rose from the ship's engines. His forearms crossed behind his back as he waited. Today would bring another prisoner to the Galactic Council's most secure detention facility. But this one was different. The cargo bay doors opened slowly. 2 guards in heavy armor walked out first. Between them stumbled a figure that made Vex lean forward against the window. The prisoner was human, that much was clear. But something was wrong with his skin. Dark lines covered every inch of the human's visible flesh. They twisted and curved like living rivers across his arms, neck, and face. The patterns moved in ways that hurt Vex's eyes to follow. They seemed to flow beneath the skin like ink in water. "What is that thing?" asked Lieutenant Kren, stepping up beside the commander. The young officer's green scales rippled with nervous energy. "That thing is a human," Vex replied, "though I have never seen one like this before." The guards brought the prisoner through the main doors. Vex could hear their boots echoing in the empty hallways. The facility held many dangerous beings from across the galaxy. War criminals, terrorists, and beings too powerful for normal prisons. But none of them had ever made the guards look so uncomfortable. Dr. Mira waited in the processing chamber. She was the best xenobiologist the council had. If anyone could understand what they were looking at, it would be her. Her tentacles moved quickly over her data pad as she prepared for the examination. The prisoner entered the chamber without resistance. He was tall for a human with black hair and dark eyes. But it was impossible to focus on his face when the markings demanded attention. They covered his skin like a living map of some unknown world. "Remove the restraints," Dr. Mira ordered. The guards looked uncertain but obeyed. The energy shackles fell away from the human's wrists. He rubbed the marks they had left but said nothing. His eyes moved around the room, taking in every detail. "State your name for the record," Dr. Mira said. The human looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Jaywook." "Jaywook what?" she pressed. "Just Jaywook." Dr. Mira made notes on her pad. "What are these markings on your skin?" Jaywook looked down at his arms. The patterns seemed to pulse gently in the bright lights. "They are mine." "Are they tattoos? Some form of body modification?" "No, then what are they?" Jaywook met her eyes. "You would not understand." Commander Vex watched through the security cameras. The human's calmness bothered him. Most prisoners were angry or scared when they arrived. This one acted like he was visiting friends. Dr. Mira moved closer with her scanning equipment. The readings made her frown. The patterns appear to be beneath the skin but not part of your natural pigmentation. They show signs of energy activity. "Is that dangerous?" Lieutenant Kren asked through the comm system. "I'm not sure," Dr. Mira admitted. "The energy levels are very low, barely detectable." She ran more scans. The patterns seemed to respond to the equipment, growing slightly brighter when the sensors came near. But they remained harmless. "How long have you had these markings?" Dr. Mira asked. "Since birth," Jaywook replied. "That's impossible. No human is born with such extensive markings." Jaywook shrugged. "Many things seem impossible until they happen." The examination continued for 2 hours. Dr. Mira cataloged every pattern she could see. There were thousands of them. Some were geometric shapes that followed mathematical rules. Others looked like writing in a language she had never encountered. The most interesting discovery came when she changed the lighting. Under different wavelengths, new patterns became visible. Layers upon layers of markings covered the human skin. Each layer seemed independent of the others. "This is remarkable," Dr. Mira muttered. "It's like your skin is storing information." Jaywook tilted his head. "What makes you think it's storing anything?" "The patterns are too complex to be random. They follow rules. There's an order to them. Perhaps you see order where none exists." Dr. Mira disagreed but didn't argue. She had dealt with uncooperative subjects before. The markings would reveal their secrets in time. The facility's AI system had been monitoring the proceedings. Its sensors detected the energy fluctuations around Jaywook, but classified them as non-threatening. The readings were filed away in the database for future analysis. "Processing complete," Dr. Mira announced. "The subject shows no signs of disease or harmful modifications. The markings appear to be benign." Commander Vex was relieved. "Assign him to Cell Block 7, Standard Containment Protocols." Jaywook was given prison clothes and led through the facility. Other prisoners watched him pass. Some had never seen a human before. Others stared at the markings with curiosity or fear. His cell was simple but clean. A bed, a desk, and basic facilities. The walls were made of energy-resistant materials that could hold beings much stronger than humans. Force fields sealed the entrance. Jae-wook sat on the bed and looked at his hands. The markings continued their slow dance across his skin. In the dim lighting of the cell, they glowed softly like dying stars. Guard Captain Tor made his evening rounds. He was old for his species and had seen many strange things during his service, but the human with the marked skin made him uncomfortable. "What do you think those patterns mean?" asked Guard Jensen, a younger member of Tor's team. "I think some mysteries are better left unsolved," Tor replied. In the security office, the night shift monitored dozens of cells. Jae-wook's cell showed normal readings. The human sat quietly on his bed, sometimes moving his fingers to trace patterns in the air. The guards assumed he was drawing, but if they had looked closer, they would have seen that he was practicing. The movements of his fingers matched the patterns on his skin. Each gesture seemed to awaken something in the markings. They pulsed brighter for just a moment before returning to their normal glow. Dr. Mira worked late in her laboratory, analyzing the data from Jae-wook's examination. The patterns defied every attempt at classification. They weren't like any known writing system. They didn't match any cultural symbols in the database. Yet something about them felt familiar, as if she had seen them before in dreams or half-remembered stories. The facility settled into its normal nighttime routine. Prisoners slept or meditated in their cells. Guards walked their patrols. The AI systems maintained their constant watch. None of them knew that the patterns on Jae-wook's skin were already beginning to change. New lines appeared as old ones faded. The living map of his flesh was rewriting itself, preparing for something that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. In his cell, Jae-wook closed his eyes and felt the ancient power stirring in his blood. Soon, the markings would be read. Soon, the truth would be known. Soon, the fire would burn again. News traveled fast through the Galactic Council's communication networks. Within 3 days, word of the marked human reached the central archive on the planet Centros. Dr. Sojin looked up from her research when the message appeared on her screen. She was a human herself, one of the few who had risen to prominence in xenolinguistic studies. Her office was filled with artifacts from 1,000 dead civilizations. Ancient tablets, broken pottery, and fragments of text that held the secrets of lost worlds. The images attached to the message made her drop her coffee cup. The geometric patterns covering the prisoner's skin looked familiar. She had seen similar designs in her studies of pre-contact human cultures. But these were far more complex than anything in the historical record. "Young-ho," she called to her research assistant. "Come look at this." Young-ho was a specialist in extinct civilizations. He had helped Sojin decode the writing systems of dozens of dead cultures. When he saw the images, his eyes widened with excitement. "These patterns follow mathematical principles," he said immediately. "Look at the way they spiral outward from central points. It's like a biological version of sacred geometry." Sojin nodded. "But why would a human have such markings? There's nothing like this in our cultural database." She sent a formal request to the detention facility. As a respected council researcher, she had the authority to study unusual prisoners. Commander Vex approved her visit within hours. The journey to the facility took 2 days. Sojin spent the time reviewing everything known about human body modification practices. None of it explained what she had seen in the images. Commander Vex met them at the docking bay. His forearms gestured nervously as he spoke. "The prisoner has been quiet since his arrival. No trouble from him at all. But the markings," he shook his head. "They seem to move on their own." "Move how?" Sojin asked. "See for yourself." They walked through the facility's sterile corridors. Other prisoners watched them pass with curious eyes. The detention center held beings from across the galaxy, war criminals, smugglers, and terrorists from 100 different species. Jae-wook sat in his cell reading a book the guards had given him. When Sojin approached, he looked up with mild interest. She could see immediately that the images had not captured the full strangeness of his appearance. The markings were alive. They flowed across his skin like slow rivers of ink. Patterns merged and separated in endless cycles. New designs appeared as others faded away. "Hello," Sojin said in Korean. "My name is Dr. Sojin." Jae-wook smiled slightly. "You are human like me. That is good. The others ask questions they cannot understand the answers to. I study old languages and dead civilizations. I think your markings might be more than simple body art. They are not art at all, Jae-wook replied. They are memory. So Jin felt her pulse quicken. Memory of what? Things that happened long ago. Things people have chosen to forget. Young-ho was taking detailed photographs with his equipment. The markings seemed to react to the camera flashes, growing brighter for brief moments before returning to their normal glow. The patterns are responding to stimuli, he observed. They're not just decorative, they're functional somehow. So Jin sat down across from Jae-wook. The force field between them hummed softly. Will you tell us about your markings? What would you like to know? Where did they come from? How long have you had them? Jae-wook looked at his hands. The patterns there were particularly dense, layering over each other like text written on transparent sheets. They have been with my family for many generations. We are the keepers of old stories. What kind of stories? Stories of war. Stories of fire. Stories of the time when humans fought against gods. So Jin exchanged glances with Young-ho. Ancient human mythology was full of stories about conflicts with divine beings. But they were just myths, weren't they? These gods, she said carefully. Were they real? Jae-wook's markings suddenly flared with brilliant light. The cell systems registered a massive energy spike. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Power surge in cell block 7, came the announcement over the intercom. All personnel maintain safe distance. The light faded as quickly as it had come. Jae-wook looked apologetic. Sorry. They respond to strong emotions sometimes. So Jin's hands were shaking as she made notes. The markings store energy. That's incredible. They store more than energy, Jae-wook said quietly. They store truth. Over the following days, So-jin and Young-ho established a routine. They would visit Jae-wook each morning and spend hours documenting his markings. The patterns were never the same twice. Each day brought new configurations and designs. So-jin began to see structure in the chaos. Certain symbols appeared repeatedly. Mathematical formulas were woven throughout the organic patterns. There were star charts and what looked like technical diagrams. It's like a living database, Young-ho said one evening as they reviewed their findings. His skin contains more information than our entire archive. The breakthrough came on the 5th day. So-jin was studying a particularly complex pattern when she recognized something. These symbols. I've seen them before. She pulled up files from her personal research. Years ago, she had studied fragments of text found in deep archaeological sites on Earth. The writing was so old that it predated known human civilization. The markings contain the same writing system, she said excitedly, but these fragments were supposedly myths. Stories about humans who could control fire and fight against sky demons. Jae-wook had been listening quietly. Not myths, he said. History, but that's impossible. If humans had such abilities, why did we lose them? Why don't we remember? Because forgetting was the price of survival. My family are the only ones who kept the true records. So Jin felt like she was standing on the edge of a great revelation. What really happened in ancient times? Jae-wook stood up and walked to the far wall of his cell. His markings began to glow more brightly. Beings came to Earth long ago. They fed on fear and worship. Humans called them gods because they were powerful and demanded obedience. But some humans fought back? Yes. They learned to use the same forces that the false gods wielded. Fire from the stars. Energy from the space between atoms. They called themselves the fire bearers. The markings on Jae-wook's skin pulsed in rhythm with his words. So-jin could see images forming in the patterns. Battles between humans wielding cosmic fire and creatures of pure energy. The war lasted for centuries, Jae-wook continued. In the end, the fire bearers won. But the cost was terrible. To prevent the power from corrupting future generations, they sealed it away. They scattered across the galaxy and let their descendants forget. But you remember, my bloodline was chosen to keep the records, to wait and watch, to be ready if the false gods ever returned. Young-ho looked up from his equipment. The energy readings are increasing. Something's happening to the markings, so Jin could see it too. The patterns were changing faster now. New symbols appeared as quickly as she could photograph them. It was as if the markings were responding to being read and understood. There's more to this story, she said. Isn't there? Jae-wook nodded grimly. The false gods are not gone. They have been hiding, growing stronger, and they have learned to be more subtle in their conquest. Before So-jin could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring again. This time they didn't stop. Commander Vex's voice came over the intercom. All researchers report to the command center immediately. We have an emergency. As they hurried through the corridors, Sojin felt a chill of fear. Something told her that their investigation had awakened more than just old memories. Behind them, Jae-wook's markings burned like living fire, casting dancing shadows on the walls of his cell. The emergency at the detention facility had attracted attention from across the galaxy. Energy readings that defied explanation were being broadcast on all scientific channels. Within hours, ships began arriving with researchers, military officials, and curious observers. One ship carried passengers that made Commander Vex particularly nervous. The elderly human who stepped onto the docking platform was known throughout the galaxy as simply the Reader. His real name was Kyung-min, and he was one of the most respected scholars in council space. Beside him walked a young woman named Hairi. She was his apprentice and specialized in studying human cultures from before they joined the galactic community. Her dark eyes took in every detail of the facility as they walked through the corridors. "Where is the prisoner?" Kyung-min asked without greeting pleasantries. Commander Vex had dealt with important visitors before, but something about the old human made him uncomfortable. "Dr. Sojin is with him now." She requested that no one else be allowed to see him until what? Until we understand what we're dealing with. Kyung-min smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Commander, I have been studying ancient texts for longer than your species has had spaceflight. If anyone can understand what you're dealing with, it is me." They found Sojin and Young-ho in the observation room outside Jae-wook's cell. Both researchers looked exhausted. They had been working around the clock to document the changes in the prisoner's markings. "The patterns are evolving faster now," Sojin explained. "Every time we think we understand one section, it transforms into something new." Kyung-min looked through the observation window. His expression changed immediately when he saw Jae-wook. The old man's face went pale and his hands began to shake. "Impossible," he whispered. "I thought they were all gone." "You know what he is?" Hairi asked. "He is a living record. A keeper of the forbidden history." Kyung-min turned to Commander Vex. "I need to speak with him immediately." "The cell is sealed for safety reasons. The energy readings will only get stronger if we delay. Open the cell." Commander Vex looked uncertain, but the authority in Kyung-min's voice was undeniable. He gave the order to disable the force field. Kyung-min entered the cell slowly. Jae-wook looked up from where he sat on his bed. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other. Then Jae-wook smiled with genuine warmth. "Reader," he said, "I wondered when you would come." "Fire-bearer," Kyung-min replied. "I thought your line had ended." "We are few, but we endure." Kyung-min approached carefully. The markings on Jae-wook's skin were brighter now, responding to the presence of someone who understood their significance. "May I read them?" Jae-wook nodded and extended his arms. Kyung-min began to trace patterns in the air above the markings, his fingers following invisible lines. As he moved, he began to speak in a language that none of the observers had ever heard. The words were ancient beyond measure. They seemed to carry weight and power that made the air itself vibrate. As Kyung-min spoke, the markings grew brighter and brighter. The facility's energy sensors registered readings that should have been impossible. "What's happening?" Commander Vex demanded. "He's activating the records," Hairi explained. "The markings aren't just decorative. They're a form of living memory storage that responds to specific activation phrases." Suddenly, the air above Jae-wook began to shimmer. Holographic images formed, showing scenes from ancient Earth. The observers gasped as they watched primitive humans wielding fire that burned without fuel, calling down lightning from clear skies and battling creatures that seemed made of pure energy. "This is the true history of humanity," Kyung-min said as he continued reading, "before we joined the galactic community, before we forgot what we really were." The images showed great cities burning as war raged between humans and beings that defied description. The creatures were beautiful and terrible, taking forms that hurt to look at directly. They commanded worship from human slaves and fed on the emotional energy of their subjects. "The Devourers," Jae-wook said quietly. "That is what we called them. They came from the dark spaces between stars, hungry for the life force of thinking beings. But the images also showed humans fighting back, men and women whose bodies glowed with inner fire, who could reshape matter with their will and call upon the power of stars themselves. They fought with weapons of pure energy and wore the cosmos like armor." "The Fire-bearers," Kyung-min continued reading. They learned to channel the same forces that the Devourers used. But where the parasites consumed energy, humans learned to create it. Young-ho was frantically trying to record everything. This changes our entire understanding of human history. If this is true, then humans were once one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Were and could be again, Harry said softly. The holographic display showed the climax of the ancient war. Fire-bearers surrounded by cosmic flame faced off against Devourers that twisted reality around them. The battle raged across multiple dimensions, with Earth itself serving as the final battleground. The Fire-bearers won, Kyungmin read, but victory came at a terrible price. The power they wielded was consuming them. They were becoming like the enemy they fought. The images showed fire-bearers whose bodies had been transformed by cosmic energy. Some had become beings of pure flame. Others had merged with the fabric of space itself. They were no longer entirely human, so they made a choice, Jae-wook said. They sealed their abilities away. They scattered across the galaxy and allowed their descendants to forget. Better to be weak and human than strong and monstrous. But some remembered, Kyungmin observed. A few bloodlines were chosen to keep the records, to watch and wait, to be ready if the Devourers ever returned. Commander Vex felt a chill run down his spine. Returned? Are you saying these creatures are still alive? Kyungmin stopped reading and looked at him with grave eyes. Commander, the beings your ancestors called gods never truly died. They simply learned to be more subtle. What do you mean? They learned that direct conquest brings resistance. Instead, they began to work through existing power structures. They infiltrate governments, corrupt leaders, and create systems that produce the fear and despair they feed upon. Harry pulled up data on her portable computer. I've been studying council records for months. There are patterns in the way certain policies have been implemented. Small changes that increase anxiety and reduce individual freedom. You're suggesting the council itself has been infiltrated, Sojin said. Not just the council, Kyungmin replied. The Devourers have been working for centuries to create the perfect feeding ground. A galaxy-wide civilization based on fear, compliance, and the worship of authority. The holographic display flickered and changed. Now it showed more recent images. Council meetings where decisions were made that seemed designed to increase suffering. Trade policies that created scarcity. Military actions that bred fear and hatred between species. They've been so careful, Jae-wook said, making each change small enough to seem reasonable. Building their feeding system one piece at a time. Young-ho looked up from his instruments. The energy readings are spiking again. Something's happening. Outside the facility, the stars began to dim. A darkness was spreading across space, moving toward them with impossible speed. It wasn't empty space, but something actively hungry, reaching out with tendrils that devoured light itself. Alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Vex received urgent reports from his security teams. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from deep space. Multiple contacts moving faster than anything we've ever seen. Kyungmin's face went grim. Our reading of the records has awakened something. The Devourers know that a fire-bearer has been found. Jae-wook stood up. The markings on his skin were now burning with the intensity of small stars. The very air around him began to ripple with heat. Then it is time to remember what we really are. The lights in the facility flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Through the observation windows, they could see other prisoners huddling in fear as something vast and terrible approached their world. Can you fight them? Commander Vex asked desperately. Jae-wook looked at his hands. The patterns there were rearranging themselves, forming new configurations he had never seen before. Ancient knowledge was awakening in his blood. I am only one, he said. But I am not alone. The fire burns in others even if they have forgotten it. He closed his eyes and reached out with senses he had never known he possessed. Across the galaxy he could feel other fire-bearer bloodlines stirring. Humans who had lived ordinary lives suddenly felt warmth spreading through their bodies as genetic locks opened for the first time in millennia. The awakening has begun, Kyungmin said with wonder and fear in his voice. Outside, the darkness reached their solar system and began to take shape. The darkness surrounding the facility was not empty space. It moved with purpose, reaching out with tendrils that seemed to drink the light from nearby stars. Commander Vex watched the sensor displays with growing horror as the readings showed impossible things. The contacts are not ships, his tactical officer reported. They appear to be living entities of some kind. Massive ones. In the cell, Kyung-min continued reading from Jae-wook's markings. The patterns were changing rapidly now, responding to the approaching threat. New symbols appeared as fast as the old ones faded away. The records are updating themselves, Sojin observed with amazement. They're showing us real-time information about what's coming. The holographic displays above Jae-wook's skin now showed the approaching entities in detail. They were beautiful and terrible beyond description. Some appeared as geometric shapes that folded through dimensions that human eyes couldn't properly see. Others took forms that seemed familiar at first but became increasingly disturbing the longer one looked at them. The Devourers take many shapes, Jae-wook explained as his markings pulsed with increasing brightness. They appear as whatever their prey expects to see from gods. Beautiful, powerful, worthy of worship and fear. Young-ho was documenting everything, but his hands shook as he worked. How did the ancient fire-bearers fight things like this? With fire that burns in the spaces between atoms, Kyung-min read. With will that reshapes reality itself. With power drawn from the hearts of stars. The facility shook as something vast passed nearby. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. In the distance, they could hear other prisoners screaming in terror as their deepest fears began manifesting around them. They feed on terror, Jae-wook said. Every moment of fear makes them stronger. Commander Vex tried to maintain order, but his own species had evolved strong fear responses for survival. The presence of the Devourers triggered instincts that left him nearly paralyzed. What do we do? How do we fight them? You cannot, Jae-wook replied. But I can remember how. He closed his eyes and let the ancient knowledge flow through him. The markings on his skin began to tell new stories. Images of training methods used by the first fire-bearers. Meditation techniques that opened pathways to cosmic energy. Fighting forms that channeled the fundamental forces of creation. The power was never truly gone, Kyung-min read with wonder. It was locked away, waiting for the bloodline to awaken it again. Jae-wook's body temperature began to rise. The air around him shimmered with heat as something deep in his genetic code activated. His heartbeat synchronized with the pulse of distant stars. His breathing matched the rhythm of solar winds. Haeri pulled up more data on her computer. I'm detecting similar energy signatures from across the galaxy. Whatever's happening to him is happening to others as well. The awakening spreads through bloodline connections, Sojin realized. When one fire-bearer activates their abilities, it triggers the awakening in others who carry the genetic markers. The holographic displays showed scenes from around the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, humans who had lived ordinary lives suddenly found themselves surrounded by flames that didn't burn. Office workers whose bodies began to glow with inner light. Farmers who could suddenly see the energy patterns that connected all living things. Most were terrified by the transformation. They had no context for what was happening to them. But a few seemed to understand instinctively. These began to seek each other out, drawn by connections that transcended normal space and time. They're remembering, Jae-wook said with satisfaction. The fire recognizes itself, but the awakening came at a cost. The facility's shields were failing under the pressure of energies they were never designed to contain. Cracks appeared in the walls as reality itself strained under the conflicting forces. Young-ho looked up from his instruments in alarm. The energy output is increasing exponentially. If this continues, the entire facility could collapse. Commander Vex made a decision that went against every protocol he knew. Release all the security locks on the prisoner's cell. Give him full access to the facility. Sir, do it now. The energy barriers around Jae-wook's cell dissolved. He stepped out into the corridor and immediately the pressure on the facility's structure began to ease. His body was absorbing and redirecting the chaotic energies that had been building up. The records show more, Kyung-min said, still reading from the flowing patterns. The ancient war was not just fought with energy weapons. The fire-bearers learned to use their connection to cosmic forces as a form of communication. As if responding to his words, Jae-wook suddenly stopped walking. His eyes closed and his markings flared with brilliant light. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Brothers and sisters of the fire, he called across impossible distances. The time of hiding is over. The enemy has returned and seeks to make slaves of all who think and dream. Remember who you are. Remember what we can become when we stand together. The response was immediate. From across the galaxy, other awakening fire-bearers answered his call. Their voices joined with his in a chorus that transcended space and time. The detention facility became a nexus point for energies that hadn't been gathered in one place for thousands of years. But the Devourers were not idle. The entities surrounding the facility began to change tactics. Instead of trying to break through the increasing defenses, they began to whisper directly into the minds of everyone present. "You are small," the voices said. "You are weak. You are nothing before powers that shape the cosmos itself. Submit and we will make your ending swift." Commander Vex felt his will crumbling under the psychic assault. Around him, guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. The whispers promised an end to fear if they would only give up the struggle, but Jawook's markings blazed brighter. The patterns rearranged themselves into configurations that hurt the Devourers to perceive. Where their whispers had carried despair, his presence now radiated defiance. "You are the small ones," he said, and his words carried the weight of stellar fire. "You are parasites that feast on fear because you cannot create anything of your own. You are nothing before the will of those who choose to be free." The battle was joined on levels that normal senses couldn't perceive. Reality warped around the facility as two fundamentally different approaches to power clashed against each other. The Devourers sought to consume and control. The Firebearers chose to create and inspire. Sojin watched in amazement as the holographic displays showed the conflict spreading across multiple dimensions. They're not just fighting for this facility. They're fighting for the right of thinking beings to remain free. The ancient war never really ended, Harry realized. It just moved to a different battlefield. Young-Ho's instruments were registering impossible readings. The quantum structure of local space-time is becoming unstable. Whatever happens next is going to change everything. Commander Vex struggled to his feet as the psychic pressure eased slightly. "What can we do to help?" Jawook opened his eyes and looked at him with compassion. "Choose," he said simply. "Choose to be free rather than safe. Choose to stand rather than kneel. Choose to remember that you are more than the fears that limit you." The markings on his skin were now telling the story of the present moment. Patterns showed the positions of Devourers around the facility. Other designs revealed the awakening Firebearers across the galaxy. Mathematical formulas described the energy flows that connected all living things. "The records are becoming prophecy," Kyungmin whispered. "They're showing us not just what was, but what could be." The visions in the holographic display shifted to show possible futures. In some, the galaxy fell to the Devourers and became a vast feeding ground for cosmic parasites. In others, the awakening Firebearers lit flames of freedom that spread from world to world. "The outcome is not predetermined," Jawook said. "It depends on the choices made by every thinking being in the next few moments." Outside the facility, the Devourers gathered their strength for a final assault. They had fed on fear and despair for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to face beings who chose hope over security. Inside the facility, humans who had never known they carried the fire began to remember what their ancestors had been capable of achieving. The attack came without warning. One moment the facility was surrounded by darkness, the next it was filled with beings of impossible beauty and terror. The Devourers had grown tired of subtle approaches and indirect feeding. They wanted the Firebearer, and they wanted him now. The first entity materialized in the main corridor. It appeared as a figure of living light, beautiful enough to make observers weep with joy and terrible enough to drive them mad with fear. Its presence warped reality around it, making the walls flow like water and the floors ripple like ocean waves. "Where is the flame that dares to burn without permission?" It spoke with a voice like singing crystals. "Where is the child who thinks to challenge those who ruled when stars were young?" Guards throughout the facility dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. The overwhelming presence of the entity triggered every instinct for worship and submission that had been bred into thinking beings over millions of years of evolution. Commander Vex tried to resist, but found himself slowly sinking to the ground. His forearms trembled as he fought against the compulsion to surrender completely. "Status report," he managed to whisper into his communicator. "Multiple breaches on all levels," came the terrified response. "The entities are everywhere. They're not breaking down the barriers, they're just appearing inside them." In the observation room, Sojin watched in horror as the readings on her instruments went completely insane. "They exist partially outside normal spacetime," she said. "Our defenses can't stop something that doesn't entirely exist in our dimension." Young-Ho was backing toward the door, his face pale with terror. "We need to evacuate. We need to run." "There is nowhere to run," Harry said quietly. She was staring at her computer screen, where sensor data showed the entire star system filling with devourer entities. They're everywhere. This was planned. The entity in the corridor began to move toward Jae-wook's location. With each step, more of the facility's structure became unstable. Metal walls turned to sand. Energy conduits transformed into writhing vines. The very laws of physics bent around the creature's presence. But as it approached, Jae-wook stepped out to meet it. His markings were now burning so brightly that looking at him directly was painful. The patterns on his skin moved faster than ever before, rearranging themselves into configurations that had not been seen for millennia. "I know you," he said to the entity. "You are the one they called the Light-Bearer, the first among the deceivers, the one who taught mortals to worship fear disguised as beauty." The entity's form rippled with anger. "I am what your species called a god before they forgot their proper place. I am the flame that burns at the heart of creation. You are nothing but a descendant of slaves who learned a few tricks." "You are a parasite," Jae-wook replied. "A thing that feeds on the worship of others because you cannot create anything yourself. You are empty at your core, and that emptiness consumes you." The confrontation between them sent shockwaves through the facility. Windows shattered as competing reality fields clashed against each other. The artificial gravity failed completely, leaving everyone floating in the suddenly unstable environment. More devourers appeared throughout the complex. They took forms designed to inspire maximum terror in each species present. For the human observers, they appeared as perfect beings of light and shadow that demanded absolute submission. For the alien guards, they manifested as the mythological figures from their own culture's stories of divine judgment. "Submit to us willingly," they spoke in unison. "Accept our rule and your deaths will be gentle. Resist and we will feed on your terror for millennia." But something unexpected happened. Young-ho, who had been backing away in fear, suddenly stopped moving. His eyes were fixed on Jae-wook, and slowly, very slowly, he began to glow with inner light. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember what my grandmother told me about the old stories, about humans who carried starfire in their blood." The light spread from his chest outward, and markings began to appear on his skin. They were simpler than Jae-wook's, more primitive, but they followed the same basic patterns. He was awakening to his firebearer heritage. "Impossible," the lead entity hissed. "We destroyed that bloodline long ago." "You tried," Jae-wook said. "But fire spreads when it finds fuel to burn." Around the facility, other humans began to transform. Guards, researchers, even some of the prisoners, started manifesting the abilities that had been locked away in their genetic code. The presence of multiple awakened firebearers created a resonance effect that activated dormant genes across entire populations. So-jin felt warmth spreading through her body as ancient knowledge flowed into her mind. She understood suddenly that her scholarly research had not been random curiosity. She had been drawn to study extinct civilizations because she carried the memories of humanity's greatest extinction event in her very cells. "The records were right," she said with wonder. "We never truly forgot. We just stopped believing." Haeri was undergoing her own transformation. Patterns of light traced themselves across her dark skin as she accessed genetic memories that went back thousands of generations. The firebearers didn't just fight with energy, she realized. They fought with hope, with the belief that thinking beings have the right to be free. The devourers found themselves facing something they had not encountered for millennia. Humans who remembered what they were capable of becoming. The entities that had seemed invincible moments before now appeared diminished, their beautiful forms flickering like candles in a wind. "This is not possible," the lead entity raged. "We severed the connections. We broke the bloodlines. We made them forget." "You made us hide," Jae-wook corrected. "There is a difference." The battle that followed was fought on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The awakening firebearers channeled energy from sources the devourers could not understand or corrupt. Where the parasites drew power from fear and worship, humans tapped into the fundamental forces that created stars and shaped galaxies. Young-ho, still learning to control his abilities, managed to create a barrier of solid light that protected the non-human observers. "I can feel others awakening," he said with excitement. "All across the galaxy. The fire is spreading." Commander Vex, partially protected by Young-ho's barrier, managed to establish communications with other council facilities. What he heard both terrified and amazed him. "Reports coming in from 17 different star systems," he announced. Human populations are manifesting energy abilities. Some are helping with evacuation efforts. Others are engaging hostile entities that match our readings here. The Devourers realized they had made a critical error. By attacking directly, they had triggered the very awakening they had spent centuries trying to prevent. The fear they sought to create had instead become the catalyst for humanity's transformation back into what they had once been. But they were not defeated yet. The lead entity gathered its remaining power and prepared for a final assault. If we cannot rule through worship, we will rule through conquest. We are still the Elder Powers. We have fed on fear for eons while you played at being ordinary mortals. The entity's form expanded until it filled the entire corridor. Its presence pressed down on everyone like the weight of a collapsing star. Even the awakening fire-bearers staggered under the psychic pressure. You have forgotten what we are truly capable of, it said. We who existed before your son was born. We who shaped the minds of entire species. We who turned gods into slaves and slaves into gods. Jae-wook felt the ancient power stirring in his blood, but he also felt something else. Doubt. The entity was right about one thing. The Devourers had millennia of experience while the Fire-bearers were just now remembering abilities they had never properly learned to use. You hesitate, the entity observed with satisfaction. Good. You begin to understand the futility of resistance. But then Kyungmin stepped forward. The old scholar's body was not transforming like the others, but his voice carried absolute authority when he spoke. You are wrong about one thing, Ancient One. You assume that humans fight alone. He gestured toward the facility's viewing ports where alien ships were arriving in the system. Commander Vex sent out a distress call before your attack began. The Council species may fear you, but they are not cowards. The first ship to arrive belonged to the crystalline hegemony, a species known for their logical approach to problem-solving. Their vessels opened fire with weapons designed to disrupt energy patterns rather than cause physical damage. The Devourer entities reeled under the assault. Their forms, which existed partially outside normal space, were vulnerable to weapons that attacked the quantum foundations of reality itself. Impossible, the lead entity snarled. Lesser species cannot harm us. Lesser species who have learned to work together, Commander Vex corrected, his confidence returning as more ships joined the battle. The arrival of external help gave the Fire-bearers the time they needed to organize their own abilities. Jae-wook reached out with senses he was still learning to control and connected with Young-ho, Sojin, and Hai-ri. Link with me, he said. The ancient records show that Fire-bearers are stronger when they fight as one. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. 4 minds joined by bonds of fire and shared purpose. Their individual abilities merged and amplified. 3 days after the attack on the detention facility, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Reports flooded in from every inhabited system. Humans were awakening to abilities they had never known they possessed. Other species were discovering hidden potentials that had laid dormant for generations. And the Devourers were no longer content to work from the shadows. Jae-wook stood on the observation deck of the Council ship Harmony, watching a battle rage in the space around the industrial world of Kepler Prime. The planet's human population had awakened en masse when the psychic shock waves from the facility reached them. Now Fire-bearers fought alongside alien defense forces against entities that had once masqueraded as the planet's patron deities. The situation is getting worse, Commander Vex reported as he joined Jae-wook at the viewing port. 17 star systems are reporting open warfare. The Devourers have stopped trying to maintain their disguises. Sojin looked up from her research station. In the days since her awakening, her abilities had grown rapidly. The markings on her skin were simpler than Jae-wook's, but they carried the same type of living information. I've been analyzing the pattern of attacks. They're not random. The Devourers are targeting systems with the highest concentrations of awakening fire-bearers. They're trying to eliminate us before we can fully organize, Young-ho added. His own transformation had stabilized, and he was learning to use his abilities to enhance his archaeological work. Ancient sites across the galaxy were revealing new secrets when examined with fire-bearer senses. Hai-ri was coordinating communications with other awakened humans. I'm in contact with 47 confirmed fire-bearers across 19 systems. The numbers are growing hourly, but so is the enemy response. The battle outside intensified as more Devourer entities arrived. These were different from the ones that had attacked the facility. Where the earlier entities had maintained beautiful forms designed to inspire worship, these appeared as pure manifestations of hunger and rage. "They're done pretending to be benevolent," Kyungmin observed. "This is what they really are when the masks come off." A new voice joined their conversation over the communication system. "This is Captain Minho of the human colony ship New Seoul. We're requesting immediate assistance. Our firebearer population just awakened simultaneously, and we're under attack by entities claiming to be our ancestral spirits." Jae-wook closed his eyes and reached out with senses that still felt new and strange. He could feel Minho's presence across the vast distances of space, along with dozens of other newly awakened firebearers on the colony ship. "I can reach them," he said, "but I'll need help to bridge that much distance." So-jin, Young-ho, and Hae-ri immediately moved to link with him. The four firebearers had learned to combine their abilities with increasing skill. Their joined consciousness stretched across space to touch the minds of their distant cousins. "You are not alone," Jae-wook spoke through the link. "Remember that fire spreads when it finds fuel to burn. Use your fear as kindling and let your anger become the spark." The response was immediate. On the distant colony ship, firebearers who had been struggling with unfamiliar abilities suddenly found their confidence. Their markings blazed brighter as they tapped into the same cosmic forces their ancestors had wielded. But the effort of maintaining such a long-range connection was exhausting. Jae-wook staggered as the link closed and the others weren't much better off. "We can't keep this up indefinitely," So-jin said, breathing heavily. "There are too many awakening populations and not enough experienced firebearers to guide them all." Commander Vex had been monitoring the tactical situation across the galaxy. "The Council is requesting a meeting with firebearer representatives. Several member species are demanding explanations about the human transformations. Some are calling for our immediate detention," Hae-ri added, reading reports on her communication device. "They're afraid we're becoming a threat to galactic stability." Kyungmin laughed bitterly. "Galactic stability under Devourer influence. They want to return to being comfortable slaves rather than face the uncertainty of freedom." The truth was more complex than that, and everyone in the room knew it. The awakening of the firebearers was causing chaos throughout the galaxy. Ancient power structures were collapsing as beings who had accepted subjugation for millennia suddenly remembered what it felt like to be free. Young-ho pulled up a galactic map on his display. Red markers showed systems under Devourer attack. Blue markers indicated confirmed firebearer populations. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. "The Devourers aren't just attacking randomly," he said. "They're specifically targeting systems where the local governments have maintained independence from council authority. They're trying to force everyone into a unified command structure. A command structure they control," So-jin realized. "They want to create a single galactic government that they can manipulate from within." The communication system activated again. This time the voice belonged to Supreme Counselor Thex, the highest-ranking official in the council hierarchy. "Attention human firebearers. You will report to Council Central immediately for evaluation and possible containment. Your unauthorized military actions have destabilized 17 star systems." Jae-wook felt his markings pulse with anger. "Unauthorized. We're defending innocent populations from entities that feed on suffering. You are also destroying the careful balance of power that has maintained galactic peace for centuries," Thex replied. "The Council cannot allow uncontrolled weapons of mass destruction to operate without oversight." Hae-ri's fingers flew over her keyboard as she accessed restricted Council databases. Her firebearer abilities seemed to enhance her technological skills, allowing her to slip past security systems that should have been impenetrable. "Got it," she said with grim satisfaction. Financial records showing payments to council officials from shell companies. Military deployment records that make no sense unless the goal was to increase fear and instability. Communication logs with entities using energy signatures that match the Devourers. "The council itself has been compromised," Commander Vex said quietly. "How long?" "At least 3 centuries, Hae-ri replied. "Maybe longer. The infiltration has been so gradual that most officials probably don't realize they're serving Devourer interests." A new alarm sounded throughout the ship. The tactical officer's voice came over the intercom with barely controlled panic. "Multiple high-energy contacts approaching. Configuration unknown. They're moving faster than anything in our database." Through the viewing port, they could see space itself beginning to twist and fold. Massive shapes emerged from dimensional rifts. entities so large that they dwarfed entire star systems. These were not the individual devourers they had fought before. These were the queens of the species, beings that had existed since the early days of the universe. The Ancient Ones, Kyungmin whispered. The text called them the First Hunger. They come only when their entire species is threatened. One of the massive entities turned its attention toward their ship. When it spoke, its voice reached every mind in the star system simultaneously. Children of fire, it said with the weight of eons behind each word. You have awakened abilities that were sealed away for good reason. Your ancestors chose to forget because they understood the price of cosmic power. Jae-wook stood and faced the entity, even though it existed on a scale that made their ship seem like a grain of sand. Our ancestors chose to hide because they didn't want to become like you. But hiding is no longer possible. Then you choose war, the entity replied. War against powers that have shaped the destiny of galaxies. War against beings who remember the birth of stars. War against the natural order itself. We choose freedom, Jae-wook corrected. Freedom for every thinking being to make their own choices. Freedom from parasites who feed on worship and fear. The entity's laughter was like the sound of colliding planets. Freedom? You offer chaos. You offer the destruction of civilization itself. Better to serve willingly than to burn in the fires of anarchy. But across the galaxy, the answer came not from Jae-wook alone, but from thousands of awakening firebearers. Their voices joined in a chorus that transcended space and time. Better to burn free than live in chains. The final battle was beginning. It would determine whether the galaxy remained a feeding ground for cosmic parasites or became something genuinely free for the first time in millions of years. Jae-wook's markings blazed with the light of newborn stars as he prepared to fight gods who had forgotten what it meant to face beings with nothing left to lose but their freedom. The age of hiding was over. The age of fire had begun.